This is the Coaching Leader Podcast, a podcast about coaching, leadership, and leading through coaching. And here's your host, Scott Gress.
Would you follow you? Welcome to the podcast. We appreciate you tuning in, and we hope that this podcast helps you grow in your thinking and leadership and using coaching as a tool for leadership. But back to that question, would you follow you? I hope that question puts you in a place of introspection and reflection. After all, if you would have trouble following you, how in the world can you assume that anyone else would or should follow you? Your title alone does not guarantee that or require people to follow you necessarily. That means that self-leadership is a critical first step to real leadership. In that regard, today we're privileged to talk to Dr. Michael Cheuk, a pastor, a speaker, a certified coach with the International Coach Federation, and the editor of Christian Coaching magazine. Michael does a great job walking us through what that means, especially as Christians, and how we can approach this process and learning about ourselves and how that impacts our leadership. And along the way, he also shares with us his work and service to others in the kingdom of God, and in some ways is also a great follow-up of the work shared last month by Pastor Keith Haney. And I would ask you to rate and review the podcast on iTunes, and also reach out to us with any feedback or questions you'd like addressed on this podcast. As I talk with people, I often catch the impression that issues like leadership development, organizational leadership and change, and coaching are kind of a forest where you can get lost. So we look forward to your specific feedback or input so that we can accurately address where you are and where you're looking forward to learning. Just reach out to me at scottgress@me.com. I want to be available to serve you in coaching and coach training and helping you to lead change in healthy and effective ways. So let's talk about that. And so now, here's my conversation with Michael Cheuk.
Hi, welcome to the Coaching Leader Podcast. I'm so pleased today to have Michael, I should say Dr. Michael Cheuk with us today. Hi, Michael. How are you?
I'm great, Scott. Thank you so much for having me on your podcast today.
Oh, I'm thrilled. We met, I think it was spring of 2016 at, what was it called? A leadership.
It was like breakthrough. Yeah.
Breakthrough coaching event with Coach Approach Ministries. And we met in Nashville. And, just immediately I was taken by you and your demeanor and your expertise and seriousness that you took coaching as we were put together in a triad. And I thought, oh, Scott, you got to up your game if you're going to be hanging around with Michael Cheuk.
Funny, because I felt the same way about you.
Oh, you're kind. You're kind. Yeah, so we've kind of kept in touch along the way since then, and I've learned about you and your work, and you are now editor of Christian Coaching magazine. You work with congregations. You are a certified coach with the International Coach Federation, and you're working with a number of Christian leaders in, now do I remember, you're in Virginia, correct?
I'm in Charlottesville, Virginia.
Oh, okay.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so just wanted to invite you onto the podcast and talk a little bit about leadership and about some of your current work and especially about coaching. So let's start out with leadership. As you've been a pastor and now working broader than just a local congregation. And leadership is such an important topic, and it's often misunderstood. So I wonder, what have you learned about leadership in those years and in those experiences? And maybe what are you learning about leadership most recently?
Yeah. Well, as I have served in congregations for around 20 years, both as an associate and as a senior pastor. And leadership is so important in a congregational setting. And I know that there's so much talk about a leader having either vision, having an ability to, affect change and transformation. And all of that is very important. But one of the things that I've come to learn about leadership is it's about a leader's own presence and a leader's own identity. So as a Christian leader, to the extent that my identity and my worth is grounded in the unconditional love and love of God in Christ, that has helped me to be more grounded, to have a sense of clarity regarding the direction that God has both for me and then helping and walking with a congregation to discern the direction that God has for us as a faith community, so that my leadership is not just me, coming down from Mount Sinai with tablets and say, my way or the highway.
Yeah.
It's is to help a congregation discern, this is what I'm sensing, so I'm going to name that. But we all have a responsibility to seek the kingdom of God first, and have then this mutual understanding of what God may be calling and leading us to be and to do. So, so there is a lot in terms of my own work, both as a congregational leader and in my current work now with faith leaders here in Charlottesville, is that sense of identity and also clarity regarding where I am called, where we are called as a collective, as a group, as a congregation, to move, to be. So,
yeah, identity and clarity. And I'm, bursting with questions in my mind as I'm listening to you. And one of those is, so what are you actually doing when you're doing that? If I could invite you to be, just real concrete with that. You said something about, I'm going to say this is what, yeah?
I just lost you just for about 2 seconds there.
Okay. How's that? Are you there?
This is great.
Okay.
Yes.
So as I was listening to you, I heard you say something like, I'm going to name that, I'm going to speak what I'm seeing, but then you'll be working with the other people, and I'm wondering, what exactly are you doing when you're doing that? What are you saying?
Yes.
How are you carrying yourself? What are you communicating? Could you break that down a little bit for us?
Sure. One of the things that I have tried and am still trying to do is to be clear about who I am and what I discern that God is calling me to be and to do. And so there is a greater solid sense of self. But at the same time, to remain connected to the folks that I am either leading or just have a relationship to. Another way to say that is, I think there is sometimes a temptation, and I have to confess, I am a people pleaser. I want people to like me. and and so there are times of great temptation that I am tempted to say what I think people want to hear and not be authentic to my own thinking and my own beliefs.
Yeah.
Because if I am clear about that and then clearly communicate that, I am afraid that people will disagree with me and not like me, and worse, criticize me and resist what I stand for, and maybe even who I am.
Yeah.
And so that's why for me, it is an ongoing struggle and learning to have that clarity that I am first and foremost fully beloved by the God who created me, by the Christ who redeemed me, by the Spirit who animates within me.
Mm-hmm.
But in this beautifully unique way that is different than any other person in the world. And so to the extent that I am grounded in that, even as I'm talking right now, I feel like a deeper sense of calmness. And so I show up not as anxious, but more grounded, more calm, and at the same time, more open to hearing and connecting with others despite disagreements that we might have. And to think that, and to understand that those disagreements are not necessarily signs of rejection of who I am, is probably more about the fact that, oh my goodness, they are not Michael Cheuk. They are their own individuals, and whatever we may disagree on, or whatever that gap might be, I begin to, and here's where coaching has been so helpful to me, to put on my coaching cap on and to have a sense of curiosity and exploration around what are those differences. Because many times I have learned that if I am able to do that, I learn so much more about valid and important points and values that those the others bring to the table. And when I'm able to hear and understand and mutually understand, then I think we become stronger because we're able to see and to bring to the table the experiences of so many others. And I truly believe that makes us a stronger organization. And the benefit is that the other person will have the experience of me seeing them, hearing them, acknowledging them. And in so doing, I hope that they will experience me valuing them.
Yeah.
And I think that's very important.
So I'm seeing a couple of things here. You're not like perhaps some building your esteem off of your accomplishments in the organization or what other people think of you, and thus maybe compromising your beliefs or values, but instead through an awareness of who you are in Christ. And then also what I heard you say was being aware of self. You can be more focused on other people, curious about them, and then the whole organization becomes more enriched because it's not just about you or your ideas, but it becomes more of a whole body of Christ thing. Am I reading you
Yes.
correctly?
Yes. So I am walking kind of, maybe not a fine line, but I am walking between two things. One is selfish, that it is my way or the highway,
Yeah.
that you have to do what I say you need to do.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, the other thing that I'm also trying to avoid, and this could maybe come across as a little bit whatever, is I am not going to be like totally selfless. And what I mean by that is that I don't have enough of clarity regarding my values, my thinking, is what I think James calls just like blowing to whatever wind that comes. I'm just blown to that direction, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I try to then come into it self-full. I'm full of myself, but hopefully in a healthy way.
Yeah.
Knowing who I am, not demanding that others accommodate to all my thinking and believing and behaving, nor am I going to toss who I am to then accommodate to others. Because as a faith leader, if you try to accommodate to everybody else, you will lead no one. You will also gain no respect. And at the end of the day, no one knows what you stand for and where you're going. And so then the whole system becomes really anxious.
Yeah. Yeah. And behind much of that, I hear fear. And so you're pushing your way or your opinion. But I'm also hearing in that identity and clarity point that you're talking about, I'm hearing, boy, you've got to really be in touch with yourself and first of all, aware. But then that also sounds like there's a fair amount of self-management, or shall we even say self-leadership in that, right?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. I have heard that the leaders can't lead others to places where he or she have not been. And so for me, part of my own journey is a journey toward self-leadership. And what I mean by that, is not that, I'm just, I'm the captain of my own fate.
Sure.
And that I'm going to, grab onto the steering wheel, white-knuckled.
Yeah.
But that I hopefully will have, continue to have a greater capacity, to lead in the sense of acknowledging, understanding, be in touch with my own emotions, my own reactivity, my own ways that I may be hooked, the buttons that I have,
Oh, sure.
all of those kinds of things, so that I am able, first and foremost, to manage myself. Because if I'm not able to do that, then I have a much less capacity to manage and lead an organizational system and other individuals too.
And I forget what the word you used, but push your buttons or get triggered. So when you start getting a little bit nervous or anxious, when you start wondering whether other people are getting that way, how's that affecting you? Is my is my blood pressure rising? Am I getting louder? Am I getting upset? And so you kind of have to go, oh, what's happening to me? And how's that coming across?
Exactly.
Oh.
Exactly. And maybe it's time to breathe deeply. Yeah.
And that's a challenge. Go ahead.
It is. And I think one of the ways that I found that in many ways I am my own worst critic, and that the critical voices in my head are much louder and persistent than many times even the critical voices out in, the congregation or the community or in my own family, my wife, my kids, whatever.
Yeah.
And so I sometimes I have to intentionally, what do they say? To give myself some compassion. And it's a self-compassion first, or self-empathy, right? To say, Michael, you're kind of fearful right now. What's going on?
Yeah.
Things will be all right. And I think in so doing, I have then a greater capacity to offer compassion to other people, so that it unhooks me from my tendency to judge others in a negative way.
Yes.
In other words, something like, to be able to walk in their shoes, or to imaginatively walk in their shoes and say, this isn't usually how they're like. But gosh, this is really, like they're screaming at me. Like, what's going on? To give myself compassion and say, okay, it's all right. And then to get to the point to maybe have a curiosity. Maybe I don't even have to ask them, but just in my own mind, like, ooh, I wonder what's going on. What challenges, what battles are they facing right now that is manifesting itself in this way?
Yeah.
And just even that question really helps me to settle down and to then work from a more principled place instead of a more reactive place.
Right. Yeah, oftentimes we read about leadership and we read about vision, purpose, mission, strategic plans, goal setting, and all that's great. But unless you get this stuff, become self-aware, and then are able to then be clear about yourself and your identity and how the emotions of others affect you, and how you're going to react or not react, and all that other stuff is almost worthless. And I really like what you said there, that if you can just be a little bit curious, and it takes you out of that place where you're wrapped up with self, and it puts you in that place of care and compassion and learning, and I would also add kind of a parallel leading.
Yes.
That gets you so much further. And I would say that's really the mindset of coaching, isn't it?
I think so. And I think that was what really drawn me into coaching in the first place when I was pastoring. Was I was kind of working. I mean, I started working and beginning to maybe explore some of the ideas that I've just articulated. And then when I started taking coaching classes, there were so many light bulb and aha moments for me. Like, oh my goodness, this is a vehicle. This is, like, for me, almost a practice and a discipline. Whether I have clients or not, right?
Yeah.
For me to continue to, if I'm able to maintain this coaching mindset, these are the practices that I'm invited into. have a mindset of curiosity, to first and foremost see the best in a person, not to see and focus on the deficiencies and the problems, but to be able to see the skills and the strengths and to celebrate that. I think so much about coaching is about clarity when we ask questions and so forth. It's just to be sure that we are clear about what we're hearing. We help clients be clear about the things that maybe as they are processing verbally, that many times those moments of insight, they're moments of clarity.
Sure.
So those are the things that I just saw so much overlap, and that coaching was a beautiful vehicle for me as a coach. First and foremost, not even just to help others, right? But I found that my desire to help others in many ways is sometimes a way to just make me feel good about myself, right? What a good person I am. I'm so helpful to other people. But it's really more about helping myself to become the kind of person that I'm feeling called to be.
And coaching puts you in that healthy place where you're not taking over for somebody inappropriately, where you might create dependence, or you're not avoiding, but you're engaging in a healthy way so they still own what they're responsible for, but you're there to support, encourage, help them to be clear. And then when they become clear, they often know exactly what to do, don't they?
Right. And they come up with action plans. They're so much better than the ones that I think I have in the back of my mind. And I'm just trying hard not to tell them, know?
Yeah. And it's amazing what they come up with. You go, wow, I would have never thought of that. That's awesome.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. Right.
Well, before we shift away from coaching, any other thoughts you have about coaching or encouragements or things that maybe our listeners would benefit from hearing that's on your mind today?
Oh, goodness gracious. Not really, not off the top of my head.
Okay.
I mean, I just appreciate having this time of conversation with you. It's been helpful, just for me to say those things again. And it is helpful for me to really reaffirm, this is what I want to be as a coach and as a person. So thank you for that opportunity.
Well, and likewise, and I appreciate you even saying that, because there's sort of a gravity, isn't there, to focus on self, to focus on our being the advice givers or the people with the answers or whatever. But you're advocating something that's very different from that, which is a coaching and coaching mindset, which can be so helpful in service to the other. And in light of that, could you just share with us a little bit of what you're doing with racial equity and reconciliation in your part of the world? I'm so fascinated and encouraged by what you're doing.
Oh, absolutely. And thanks for asking. So, for better, for worse, Charlottesville, Virginia has kind of become in some ways ground zero, right? It's like a meme or a shortcut when people say Columbine, right? You think of the shooting. So when they say Charlottesville, many people think of the summer of where the Ku Klux Klan and also the white supremacists came in July and August, and everything that happened. That was so awful.
Yeah.
And I have been part of a group of interfaith faith leaders having monthly breakfast and conversations since 2015.
Wow.
And it is called the Charlottesville Clergy Collective. It is led by an African-American pastor who has served Mount Zion First African Baptist Church for over 30 years and was a former mayor of Charlottesville. And when the shooting happened in Charleston, South Carolina in 2015, he called a group of us pastors together and asked the question, if something were to happen like that in my church, who would I call among you, right,
Wow.
during this breakfast? And he looked around and he said, I would call none of you because I don't know you. I've been in this community for so long, and yet I still don't have the kind of trust and relationship with you that I feel comfortable just picking up the phone if some horrific tragedy were to take place in my church. And that was such an impactful wake-up call for me.
Oh, yeah.
And because I think we pastoral leaders, I know for me, there's so many demands from our congregation that many times it is hard to connect. And we work in silos. And somehow we missed perhaps opportunities to partner with one another to address societal challenges. And so that's what we've been doing. And we have, as a collective, in 2018, we sponsored a Charlottesville to Jamestown pilgrimage, whereby for a week we held educational sessions that talked about the history of race in America, in Christianity, in our city. We walked the slave trail in Richmond, where the enslaved from Africa would land in Richmond and be jailed as a holding pen before they were auctioned off. We went to Jamestown, to Fort Monroe and Fort Comfort, where the first enslaved Africans were landed in the Virginia colony. And so just kind of tracing back our history from kind of where all of this came from. And then this past year, we organized 3 community conversation dinner gatherings where we talked about, when did we first kind of realize and talked about, realize what race is? What is the history of our own congregations regarding our own complicity in maybe like massive resistance, where public schools were closed and there were several churches in town that opened up basically schools just for their white children. Ways that perhaps our own city redlined residents from African American community from African Americans so that they could not buy homes in certain neighborhoods where thriving and vibrant African American neighborhoods were basically taken over and razed to the ground, and they were dislocated. And for 10 years, that piece of property near downtown was left undeveloped, and it still has tremendous economic, health implications for so many of our residences. So just kind of raising up the history, to be confronted by the truth, to do that inner work of, so like in my own life, I was born in Hong Kong and I moved to the States in 1973. So there's such a big part of me that says, I get a pass because my ancestors were not here when Africans were enslaved and so forth. But I've come to realize that even so, I have, having lived in the States since I was 7, there are assumptions that I have about maybe like the inferiority of certain groups of people that that is deep within me that I need to dismantle in myself, and that in all the kinds of ways that I'm trying to prove that I'm not racist, that is not enough, that I have to work actively in looking and examining areas of my life that I may be complicit both in my thinking and my beliefs and in my actions that contribute toward racial inequity, and then finding ways that I can reverse that in my own life, in my family's life, in my congregation, in my community. So that is a continuing journey for me.
Yeah, and I'm so encouraged that not only are you leading in that way and teaching us, but that the clergy are getting together and modeling that for the rest of society. What a beautiful thing. What a beautiful thing. And I imagine you being right in the midst of it in such a historic, part of the United States, that there they are, providing that for people. I imagine that is really been just a beautiful example to the whole community, I'm sure.
Yeah. And those faith leaders have inspired me so much, because it is very, very hard to lead a congregation, to even have sustained conversations about race in many of our white congregations, because and so it's hard enough to be a pastor than to respond to God's calling in this time and in this place, to look hard. Well, maybe I would say to allow God's Spirit to move among us, to teach us the truth about ourselves.
Yeah.
In this area. It's a very, very challenging thing. And I'm so inspired by their commitment, their courage, and by their faith.
Yeah. And with the help of God, all things are possible, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Well, Michael, thank you so much for the time today. I know that you do coaching. I know you do consulting. I know you do public speaking. If people wanted to get in touch with you, could you just share a little bit more about what you do and how they could get in touch with you?
Sure. Well, as the editor for Christian Coaching Magazine, I am always looking for folks who would be willing to submit articles about coaching in the context of Christian ministry, in the context of business, from a coaching, from a Christian perspective. And so folks can get a hold of me by going to christiancoachingmag.com, and they can subscribe to the magazine either as a registered user, which is free, or as a subscriber, which allows them to access the latest content. And it's only $15 a year, and that money is used to support the practice of Christian coaching. So that is one way. Another way is my website is Michael K Cheuk, CHEUK.com, and they can contact me and see some of the things that I'm working on in terms of projects and coaching. I do facilitation for, I did a facilitation for the executive board for the Baptist General Association of Virginia as a way for folks who really didn't know one another to get to know one another, team building, in that forming stage of groups, right?
Yeah, so
and
sure.
Yep, and have worked with staff of various different churches too, and have also worked with staff in terms of finding a a staff evaluation process for them. That's one thing that when I was a pastor, I dreaded staff evaluations. But I found that a coaching approach can be very helpful. That is less about, for the next hour, I'm going to be hit by everything that I've done wrong for the last year or whatever, and find ways to both be seen in terms of my contributions, my strengths, but also to co-create action steps toward the building up of even greater strengths and ways that others might be able to help me in in areas of challenge and learning. So,
that's brilliant, awesome. Well, thank you so much. So your contact information can be found on Michael K Cheuk, CHEUK.com. Correct?
That's correct. That is correct. That's correct.
Well, you've been so patient with me prior to us recording, and you've been so generous with your time. Thank you very much, Michael.
Oh, my goodness. It was a pleasure. And it was great, really, meeting you back in, 2016. And all the best to you in your ministry, your coaching, and also in these podcasts, too. I just had a chance to take a look at it. You've talked to some really great people, and now it's such an honor for me to be included in the number, so to speak.
Well, we are blessed. We are blessed. All right, Michael, thanks so much. God bless you.
God bless you. Thank you.
Thanks so much to Michael for your time today. Your insights about leading yourself are deep and profound and so important that without it, all the other elements of leadership become practically irrelevant. And I would encourage you to subscribe to Christian Coaching Magazine and all that is available there to sharpen who you are in service to the Lord and others, and to reach out to Michael Cheuk. God bless you in your leading, growing as a leader and growing other leaders. And we're eager being a support to you in your own journey of leadership and coaching and coming alongside others. So we look forward to hearing from you and talking with you next time on The Coaching Leader.